He chose his fortune over her heart, but found her in his castle dungeon. The chains bit into her wrists as she stood in his dungeon, and when she whispered, "Please, make it fast," Gilbert realized with crushing clarity that he'd spent a fortune building a castle, but had bankrupted the only part of himself worth saving. Welcome, my beloved. Before we dive into the whole story, please click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as beautiful as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, let's get into it. The candle trembled in Gilbert's hand, casting shadows that danced across Irene's face like accusations. 3 days ago, she'd stolen from him. 2 days ago, his guards had dragged her through Ravenmoor's rain-soaked streets. 1 day ago, he'd thrown her into this dungeon without looking at her face. Now he couldn't look away. The stone walls wept moisture that pooled on the floor, and the air carried the scent of damp earth and despair. Irene stood against the wall, her wrists bound in iron shackles that seemed obscene against her pale skin. Her dress, once cream-colored and modest, was torn at the hem and stained with mud. But it was her eyes that undid him. Those same eyes that had once looked at him with hope now held nothing but hollow acceptance. "Please," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Make it fast." Gilbert opened his mouth, but no words came. What had he expected? That she'd beg for mercy? Plead her case? The Irene he'd known would have fought, but the woman before him had already surrendered, and somehow that was infinitely worse. "You stole from me," he finally managed, and even to his own ears, the words sounded pathetic, weak, as if he were trying to convince himself more than her. A bitter smile touched her lips. "Yes, 200 pounds. Hardly worth the price of these chains, I imagine. Your steward probably spends more on wine in a week. It's not about the amount. It's never about the amount with you, is it?" She lifted her chin, and for a moment he saw a flash of the woman who'd stood in his study every Tuesday for half a year, refusing to give up on her father's debts. It's about control, about owning everything and everyone. Well, congratulations, Gilbert. You finally own me too. The accusation hit harder than it should have. He took a step closer, the candlelight illuminating the bruise on her cheek, dark purple against porcelain skin. His jaw tightened. "Who did that to you?" "Does it matter?" She looked away. "You sent them, the guards, your men. What difference does it make which one struck me?" Something cold and terrible unfurled in his chest. He'd given orders to bring her in, yes, but he hadn't said. He would never have. Except he had, hadn't he? By his silence, by his absence, by choosing his wounded pride over everything else that mattered. "I didn't know," he said, and hated how inadequate it sounded. "Of course you didn't." Irene laughed, but it was a broken sound. "You never know, Gilbert. You never see past your ledgers and your properties and your precious investments. You didn't see me falling in love with you during those visits. You didn't see me hoping, like a fool, that maybe you felt something too. And you certainly didn't see that when I took that money. It wasn't for me." He froze. "What?" "My father's debts." She met his eyes now, and hers were bright with unshed tears. "Before he died, he'd borrowed from men far more dangerous than you. Men who don't settle accounts in courtrooms. When you seized our estate, I had nowhere to turn. They came for me the night after you rejected me. Said they'd wait 1 week, and if I didn't pay..." She swallowed hard. "So yes, I stole from you. I broke into your study and took enough to buy myself time. I'm a thief, a criminal, everything you always suspected I might be." The world tilted beneath Gilbert's feet. All this time, he'd thought her theft was about greed or revenge. He'd convinced himself that she'd been playing him from the start, that her feelings had been manipulation. But standing here now, seeing the defeat in her shoulders and the truth in her eyes, He understood with sickening clarity that he'd been wrong about everything. "Irene, don't." She turned her face away. "Whatever you're about to say, don't. Just do what you came here to do. Call the magistrate. Have me transported or hanged or whatever fate awaits thieves who steal from men like you. At least it'll be over." The candle guttered in his hand, wax dripping onto his fingers. He should leave. Should let the law handle this. Should maintain the distance between them that he'd worked so hard to build. Instead, he heard himself say, "I'm not going to execute you." Her head snapped toward him, confusion flickering across her face. "What?" "I'm not—" He stopped, his throat tight. "I didn't come here for that." "Then why?" The question emerged, raw and desperate. "Why chain me in your dungeon? Why let your guards beat me? Why any of this, Gilbert?" "Because I was angry. Because I was hurt. Because I'd started to believe you might actually care, and your theft felt like proof that I was right to never trust anyone." But he couldn't say that. Not when she stood there in chains, not when he could see the purple bruise blooming on her cheekbone, not when he'd already done so much damage. "I don't know," he whispered instead, and it was perhaps the first honest thing he'd said to her in weeks. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Gilbert set the candle on a rusted iron bracket jutting from the wall, then fumbled with the ring of keys at his belt. His hands shook. When had they started shaking, as he searched for the right one? "What are you doing?" Irene's voice carried a note of panic now, as if his unpredictability frightened her more than his cruelty had. "Getting you out of those chains." He found the key, small and brass, worn smooth from decades of use. How many people had worn these shackles before her? The thought made him ill. "Why?" She pressed herself against the wall as he approached, and he realized with a jolt that she was afraid of him. Of him. The man who'd once made her smile during those Tuesday visits, who'd caught himself looking forward to her arguments about interest rates and repayment schedules. He stopped mid-step. "I'm not going to hurt you." "You already have." The words were quiet but cut deeper than any blade. "You hurt me the night I offered you my heart, and you chose your fortune instead. You hurt me when you seized my family's estate, and you hurt me when you sent armed men to drag me through the streets like an animal. So forgive me if I don't trust your sudden change of conscience." Every accusation was deserved. He deserved worse, actually. But he approached anyway, moving slowly like one might approach a wounded creature, and held up the key where she could see it. "You're right," he said. "About all of it. I've been a bastard and a fool, and I've hurt you in ways I'm only beginning to understand. But I need you to know something, Irene. When I sent the guards, I didn't know about the other men. The dangerous ones. I didn't know you were trying to save your life. I thought—" His voice cracked. "I thought you'd betrayed me. Proven that I was right to never trust anyone. But I was wrong." She watched him with those devastating eyes, searching for lies, for manipulation. He let her look. Let her see whatever truth might still exist in him beneath all the armor he'd built from gold and bitterness. Finally, she extended her wrists toward him. "Do it, then." The shackles opened with a click that echoed through the dungeon. Angry red welts circled both her wrists, where the iron had bitten into skin. She rubbed them gingerly, wincing, and he had to force himself not to reach for her hands. "The men who threatened you," he said. "What are their names?" She looked at him warily. "Why?" "Because I'm going to pay them." "With my debt?" Bitterness colored her laugh. "How generous! Adding it to what I already owe you, I suppose. I'll be paying you back for the rest of my life." "No debt." He met her eyes. "I'll pay them, and you'll owe me nothing. Consider it restitution for—" He gestured vaguely at the dungeon, at her bruised face, at the catastrophe he'd made of everything. For this, I don't understand you. She wrapped her arms around herself, and he realized she was shivering. The dungeon was cold, and her dress provided little warmth. One moment you're throwing me in chains, the next you're offering charity. What game are you playing? No game. He removed his coat, heavy wool lined with silk, and held it out to her. When she didn't take it, he stepped closer and draped it over her shoulders. She flinched at the contact but didn't pull away. I'm trying to fix my mistakes, or at least begin to. You can't fix this. Her voice was hollow. You made your choice that night in your great hall. You chose gold over me. That's not something you can undo with a few kind gestures and a coat. She was right, of course, but he had to try. Had to do something other than stand here drowning in the weight of his own stupidity. Come with me. He moved toward the dungeon door. You need food, a proper room, medical attention for that bruise. I need to leave this castle. She didn't follow him. I need to get as far from you as possible, because every moment I spend near you reminds me that I was stupid enough to love a man who keeps his heart locked away tighter than his vaults. The words should have stung. Instead, they settled over him like recognition, like truth. You're free to go, he said quietly. But those men you owe, they'll still be waiting. And without the estate, without any resources, where will you go? How will you survive? Irene stood in the dungeon doorway, Gilbert's coat heavy on her shoulders, and felt the full weight of her impossible situation. He was right, damn him. She had nowhere to go. No family left, no friends who'd risk associating with a known thief, no means to support herself. The men who'd threatened her, Silas Crane and his brother Wendell, weren't the type to forget a debt. They'd find her eventually, wherever she ran. But staying here, in this castle, near this man who'd carved her heart out and handed it back to her in pieces, that might destroy her more completely than any threat Silas Crane could make. How long? She asked, not looking at him. How long what? How long until you pay the Cranes? Until I'm free of that particular doom? She heard him shift behind her. 2 days, 3 at most. I'll send a messenger tonight to arrange the meeting. 2 days. She could survive 2 days, couldn't she? Lock herself in whatever room he provided, avoid him entirely, then disappear into the night the moment the debt was cleared. Start over somewhere, anywhere. Fine. She pulled his coat tighter. But I want your word. Once the debt is paid, I walk out of here and you never contact me again. No demands for repayment, no claims on my future, nothing. We part ways as strangers. Irene, your word, Gilbert. She finally turned to face him, and something in her expression made him step back. Swear it, or I'll take my chances with the Cranes right now. He looked as though she'd struck him, but he nodded slowly. You have my word. Once the debt is paid, you're free. Completely. Then show me to this room of yours. She walked past him, out of the dungeon, into the torch-lit corridor that smelled of smoke and secrets. And send for a physician if you must, but I don't want to see you again until I'm leaving. She felt rather than saw his flinch, but he said nothing, simply led her through winding passages, up stone staircases worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, past tapestries depicting battles and hunts and other violent histories. The castle was beautiful in a cold, imposing way, exactly like its owner. They stopped at a heavy oak door on the 3rd floor. He pushed it open to reveal a room that stole her breath, despite her determination to feel nothing. Rich burgundy curtains framed tall windows overlooking the cliffs. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, its linens pristine white. A fireplace already crackled with warmth, and a writing desk sat near the window, complete with paper and ink. This was my mother's room, he said quietly. before she died. It's been empty for years, but I had the staff prepare it. There's a lock on the inside of the door. You'll be safe here. My mother's room. The detail felt significant, though she couldn't say why. She stepped inside, her muddy shoes leaving prints on the expensive carpet. Everything about this room spoke of care, of value, of the kind of wealth she'd never known. It made her feel small and dirty and entirely out of place. "I'll have dinner sent up," he continued, "and the physician should arrive within the hour. Is there anything else you need?" What she needed was to turn back time, to never set foot in this castle, never fall in love with a man whose soul had been auctioned off piece by piece until nothing remained but gold and emptiness. But since that was impossible, she settled for simplicity. "Answers," she said, turning to face him. "I need to know why. Not why you're helping me now. I understand guilt when I see it. But why did you choose the estate over me that night? I offered you everything I had, and you looked at me like I was trying to swindle you. Like my love was some kind of con. I need to know what I did to make you believe that." He stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the corridor's torchlight, and for a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his shoulders sagged, and he suddenly looked older than his 30 years. "You didn't do anything," he said. "That's the hell of it, Irene. You were genuine. You were real." And that terrified me more than any deception could have, because if I accepted what you were offering, if I let myself believe that someone could actually want me for something other than my money, then I'd have to admit that I'd been wrong about everything, about love being weakness, about trust being liability, about the only thing in this world worth having being something you could count and lock away in a vault. He paused, and she heard him swallow hard. "I've spent my whole life building walls," he continued, "protecting myself from being hurt the way I was hurt as a child when people mocked my poverty, when doors slammed in my face, when I learned that in this world, money is the only thing that commands respect. And then you walked into my study on that Tuesday with your impossible optimism and your ridiculous proposals, and you made me feel something I'd sworn I'd never feel again. You made me hope, and I hated you for it." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest, and far too late. Irene gripped the doorframe, her legs suddenly unsteady. She wanted to rage at him, to throw his words back in his face, to make him hurt the way she hurt, but beneath the anger was something more dangerous, understanding. "Hope isn't weakness," she said finally, "and love isn't a transaction. That's what you never understood, Gilbert. I didn't come to you that night expecting anything in return. I wasn't trying to manipulate you into sparing the estate. I just wanted you to know that someone saw past your walls. Someone cared about the man underneath all that armor. I know that now." His voice was rough. "Too late, but I know it. Yes, too late." She stepped back into the room. "Thank you for your honesty, and for the room, but we're done here. Send your physician, pay the Cranes, and let me go. That's all I want from you anymore." She started to close the door, but his hand shot out, catching it. Not forcing it open, just holding it there, his knuckles pale against the dark wood. "What if I can't let you go?" The words came out strangled. "What if I've realized that every coin in my vault is worthless compared to what I lost when you walked out of my hall that night?" "Then you should have realized it sooner." She pushed harder on the door, but he held firm. "You had your chance, Gilbert. I stood in your hall and offered you my heart, and you chose property over me. Now you want me to believe you've changed? That suddenly, magically, you're capable of caring about something that can't be measured in pounds sterling? I'm not that foolish anymore. I'm not asking you to believe anything." His eyes met hers through the gap in the door, desperate and pleading. "I'm asking for a chance to prove it. 2 days, Irene. Stay for 2 days while I handle the Cranes. Let me show you that I'm not the man I was a week ago. People don't change in a week." "No," he agreed. but they can start to. They can see what they've lost and decide to become someone worthy of getting it back. That's what I'm trying to do. Please, just 2 days. She should refuse. Should slam the door in his face and lock it and spend the next 48 hours planning her escape. But something in his voice, the crack of vulnerability, the admission of failure, made her hesitate. "Why does it matter?" she asked. "Why do you care whether I believe you or not? Pay my debt, satisfy your guilt, and move on with your life. Find some other woman to build your walls around." "Because I don't want another woman." The admission came out fierce. "I want you. I've wanted you since that first Tuesday when you argued with me about interest calculations and proved you understood finance better than half my advisors. I've wanted you every week since, even when I was too much of a coward to admit it. And I still want you now, standing here with your face bruised because of me, your wrists marked by chains I put there, looking at me like I'm everything you despise. I want you anyway." The words landed like blows. Irene felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She wouldn't cry. Not for him. Not again. "Wanting isn't enough," she said. "My father wanted wealth but died in debt. I wanted your love but got your rejection instead. Wanting doesn't change anything unless you're willing to sacrifice for it, to risk for it, to choose it even when choosing costs you everything you thought mattered. Then that's what I'll do." He released the door, stepped back. 2 days. I'll prove it to you in 2 days." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. She stood frozen, watching his retreating form until he disappeared around a corner. Then she closed the door, locked it from the inside, and finally allowed herself to slide down the wood until she sat on the floor, his coat pooling around her. What had just happened? One moment she was resolved to leave, to never see him again. And the next he was confessing feelings and making promises and looking at her with eyes that held something uncomfortably close to genuine emotion. Was this real? Or just another form of manipulation? One more attempt to control her? To own her the way he owned everything else? The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside the window, the sea crashed against the cliffs with rhythmic violence. And somewhere in this castle, Gilbert was probably already drafting the letter to the Cranes, calculating the payment, treating her salvation like just another business transaction. Except he'd given her his mother's room, had looked shattered when she'd accused him of playing games, had admitted to wanting her even now, after everything. A knock at the door made her jump. "Miss?" A woman's voice, elderly and kind. "I'm bringing dinner. And the physician is here to tend your injuries." Irene stood, straightened her torn dress, and unlocked the door. The physician was a stern-faced woman named Dr. Judith Kemp, whose no-nonsense manner reminded Irene of her late mother. She examined the bruise, tutted disapprovingly, and applied a salve that smelled of herbs and alcohol. "The guard who struck you should be dismissed," Dr. Kemp said, bandaging Irene's wrists with gentle efficiency. "This kind of treatment is barbaric, debt or no debt." "Does everyone in this castle know I'm a thief?" Irene asked quietly. "Everyone knows you're a guest who arrived under unfortunate circumstances." Dr. Kemp met her eyes. "And that the master is in a state I've never seen before. Frantic, guilt-ridden, almost human." "Almost? He's not been human in a very long time, child. Not since his mother died and left him alone in a world that only valued his purse." She finished the bandaging. "But something's changed. I saw it in his eyes when he summoned me. Whatever you did to him, it's shaken something loose. I didn't do anything except exist." Irene touched the bandage on her wrist. And apparently that was crime enough. Dr. Kemp packed her supplies. "Eat the dinner. Sleep. You look half dead on your feet. Whatever happens tomorrow, you'll need your strength." After she left, Irene picked at the food. Roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables and butter, and tried not to think about how she'd eaten stale bread and watered soup for the past 3 days in that dungeon. Tried not to think about anything at all, really, except the immediate plan. Survive 2 days, leave, disappear. But her mind kept circling back to him, to the way his hands had shaken when he'd unlocked her chains, to the crack in his voice when he'd said, "I want you anyway," to the possibility, dangerous, foolish, impossibly tempting, that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. She slept fitfully, dreaming of dungeons that turned into ballrooms, chains that became silk ribbons, and Gilbert's face hovering over hers with an expression she couldn't quite name. When she woke, morning light streamed through the windows, and a note had been slipped under her door. The handwriting was precise, controlled, his handwriting. "The Cranes will meet me tonight at the Copper Bell. The debt will be settled by morning. I've arranged for clothes to be brought to your room. Please rest and recover. You need nothing from me except time. Yours, G. Yours." The word seemed to mock her. She crumpled the note, then smoothed it out again, tracing the letters with one finger. The audacity of him, signing it that way, as if he had any claim to possession, to belonging, to the intimate shorthand of... Another knock. This time, a young maid with auburn hair entered carrying an armload of dresses. "From the master," she said, laying them on the bed. "He said you were to have whatever you needed, and he asked if you'd consider walking the gardens this afternoon. Said the fresh air might do you good." "Tell him I'll consider it," Irene said, knowing she wouldn't. The last thing she needed was to be seduced by his castle, his gardens, his attempts at redemption. But after the maid left, and she examined the dresses, simple, elegant, clearly expensive but not ostentatiously so, she found herself wavering. What harm could a walk do? She'd be leaving tomorrow anyway. Maybe seeing the place in daylight would make it easier to forget, would strip away the romantic notions that kept trying to take root despite her better judgment. She chose a dress in deep green wool, warm and practical, a far cry from her ruined gown. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Clean, dressed in quality fabric, with bandaged wrists and a fading bruise, she looked like someone caught between two worlds. Not quite broken, not quite whole. The castle in daylight was different from the torch-lit nightmare she'd navigated last night. Windows let in streams of sun. Servants nodded politely as she passed. Paintings on the walls depicted landscapes rather than battles, rolling hills, stormy seas, forests in autumn glory. She found herself stopping before one, a scene of a small cottage surrounded by wildflowers, and wondering why a man who valued wealth above all else would hang something so modest, so simple, in his halls. "It was my mother's favorite." She spun around. He stood at the end of the corridor, dressed simply in white shirt and dark trousers. No coat, no formal wear, almost vulnerable in his plainness. "You're following me," she said, accusation sharp in her voice. "No, I was hoping I'd find you." He didn't move closer. "The maid said you might walk the gardens. I wanted to show you the way." The gardens were breathtaking, which annoyed Irene more than she cared to admit. Roses climbed stone walls despite the autumn chill. A fountain splashed in the center of a courtyard, water catching sunlight like scattered diamonds. Gravel paths wound between hedges trimmed into perfect geometry, and in the distance, she could hear the sea. Gilbert walked beside her, maintaining a careful distance. Not touching, not crowding, just present. It was somehow worse than if he'd tried to take her hand. This restraint suggested awareness, consideration, qualities she desperately wanted to believe he didn't possess. "You're meeting them tonight?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Yes, at 8 o'clock. I'll have the full amount. £1,200, you said?" She nodded. The number had seemed impossible when Silas Crane first demanded it. more than her father's original debt, more than she could earn in 5 years of honest work. She'd been so desperate, so terrified, that stealing from Gilbert had seemed like her only option. "And after tonight?" she asked. "What happens to me?" "Whatever you want." He paused at the fountain, trailing his fingers through the water. "I meant what I said. You'll owe me nothing. You can leave, start over somewhere new. I'll even provide funds if you—" "No." The refusal came out sharper than intended. "No more money, Gilbert. I don't want to owe you anything, not even charity." "It wouldn't be charity." "Then what would it be?" She turned to face him. "Guilt? Penance? A way to ease your conscience?" "Maybe all of those things." He met her eyes. "Or maybe it would be what I should have done when you first came to me asking for help. Maybe it would be choosing to care about someone more than I care about my bloody pride." The frustration in his voice caught her off guard. This wasn't the cold, calculating man who'd rejected her in his great hall. This was someone raw, uncertain, struggling with emotions he clearly didn't know how to process. "You can't just decide to care," she said. "It doesn't work that way." "Then how does it work?" He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of him, sandalwood and something indefinable. "Tell me, Irene, how do I prove to you that I'm not the man you think I am, that I'm capable of being more than gold and greed?" "You can't prove it in 2 days." She wrapped her arms around herself. Love, trust, caring, those things take time. They build slowly, through actions and choices and moments of vulnerability. You can't manufacture them just because you've suddenly decided they're valuable. "So what are you saying? That it's hopeless? That I've destroyed any possibility of us beyond this transaction?" The question hung between them. She could say yes. Could end this right now, spare them both the futile hope and inevitable disappointment. It would be kinder, probably. Cleaner. But something in his expression, the genuine desperation, the willing admission of his failures, made her hesitate. "I'm saying I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know if you've changed, or if this is just temporary guilt. I don't know if you're capable of putting someone else before your fortune. And I don't know if I'm strong enough to risk my heart on you again, only to have it returned in pieces." He flinched. "I deserve that." "Yes, you do." She turned away from him, facing the sea. "But here's what I'll offer. After tonight, after the debt is paid, I won't leave immediately. I'll stay 1 more day, and during that day, you can try to show me who you really are. Not your wealth, not your castle, not your grand gestures, just you, the man underneath all the armor. And if I succeed, then maybe we'll have a conversation about what comes next." She looked back at him over her shoulder. "But Gilbert, understand this. I won't settle for half measures. I won't be the woman you keep in your castle while you continue to treat love like a ledger entry. If you want any chance with me, you have to be willing to let go of everything you think protects you. Can you do that?" The question challenged him in ways she knew cut deep. Asking this man to abandon his defenses, to risk vulnerability, was like asking the sea to stop crashing against the cliffs. It went against his fundamental nature. But he surprised her. "I can try," he said quietly. "I don't know if I'll succeed. I don't know if I'm capable of being what you need. But I can try, Irene. And that's more than I've offered anyone in 15 years. What do you think? Can someone who's built their entire life around wealth truly learn to value something money can't buy?" She wanted to believe him. God help her. Standing here in his gardens with sunlight warm on her face and his honest desperation hanging in the air, she wanted to believe that people could change, that the man who'd chained her in his dungeon could become someone worthy of her trust. But wanting and believing were 2 different things. Night fell with ominous weight. Irene stood at her window, watching Gilbert ride out with 2 of his men toward the village and the Copper Bell. He sat straight in the saddle, his coat dark against the moonlit landscape, and she found herself gripping the windowsill so hard her bandaged wrists ached. What if the Cranes refused the payment? What if they demanded more? What if they hurt him? The last thought stopped her cold. Since when did she care about his safety? Since when did the sight of him riding toward potential danger make her heart race with something other than anger? "Since you started hoping again, fool," a voice whispered in her mind. She turned from the window, pacing the room like a caged animal. This was ridiculous. She should be planning her departure, not worrying about a man who'd proven himself unworthy of her concern. But her mind kept constructing terrible scenarios. Gilbert bleeding in an alley, the Cranes laughing as they took his money and demanded more, violence spilling across the negotiations like wine across a table. Hours crawled past. She tried to read a book from the shelf, but the words swam meaninglessly. Tried to sleep, but her eyes refused to close. Around midnight, she heard hoofbeats in the courtyard below and flew to the window. He was back, alone, riding slowly, shoulders slumped with exhaustion, but alive, whole, safe. The relief that flooded through her was entirely inappropriate and completely undeniable. She was still standing at the window when she heard footsteps in the corridor, followed by a soft knock at her door. "Irene, are you awake?" His voice carried a weight she couldn't identify. She crossed to the door, pressed her palm against the wood. "Did you pay them?" she asked through the barrier. "Yes, it's done. You're free of the debt." She should feel relieved, grateful, ready to leave. Instead, she found herself asking, "Are you all right?" Silence. Then, "Can I come in, please? I need to tell you something." Every instinct screamed danger. Opening this door, letting him into the space she'd claimed as sanctuary, was foolish beyond measure. But her hand was already turning the lock, her body betraying her better judgment. He stood in the corridor looking haggard. A bruise darkened his left cheekbone, and his knuckles were scraped raw. Blood, not much, but enough to alarm her, stained his collar. What happened? She pulled him inside without thinking, closing the door behind them. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." He touched his cheek gingerly. Silas Crane wasn't pleased about the circumstances of the debt. Said I had no business interfering in his collections. Things got heated. "He hit you." It wasn't a question. "After I told him that if he ever came near you again, I'd burn his establishment to the ground and salt the earth where it stood." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "He took exception to my tone." "You fought him. Over me." The idea was absurd. Gilbert, who avoided physical confrontation like a plague, who hired people to handle his dirty work, had actually thrown punches on her behalf. Not exactly fought, more like aggressively negotiated. He winced, rolling his shoulder. "His brother held me while Silas demonstrated his displeasure. But I made my point. You're under my protection now. Anyone who wants to harm you will have to go through me first." The declaration should have felt possessive, controlling. Instead, it landed with the force of something precious, something she'd never expected to hear from this man who measured everything in terms of cost and benefit. "Why would you do that?" she whispered. "Why risk yourself for me?" He met her eyes, and what she saw there stole her breath. Not calculation, not strategy, just raw, honest emotion that he'd clearly stopped trying to hide. "Because somewhere between your first visit to my study and this moment right now, you became the most valuable thing in my world," he said. "Not your debt, not your estate, not any transaction we might engage in. You, just you. And I realized tonight, sitting across from Silas Crane and his threats, that I would burn this entire castle to the ground if it meant keeping you safe. That every coin in my vault is meaningless if you're not here to argue with me about interest rates and call me out on my cowardice." She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. could only stare at him as he stood there bleeding and bruised and saying things that rewrote every assumption she'd made about who he was. "You're serious," she said. "Completely. But your fortune means nothing without someone to share it with. I understand that now." He took a tentative step closer. "These past 2 days, knowing you were in this castle but refusing to see me, have been worse than any financial loss I've ever suffered. It's like you said, wanting isn't enough unless you're willing to sacrifice for it. So I'm telling you now, Irene Marlowe, that I would sacrifice everything I own for one more chance with you." The room seemed to shrink around them. Irene's heart hammered against her ribs, her mind racing through implications and possibilities and the dangerous, terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, this was real. "Everything?" she asked. "You'd give up the castle? Your fortune? All of it?" "If that's what it took to prove myself to you, yes." He didn't hesitate. "I'd go back to being the poor boy I was before I made my first investment. I'd live in that cottage from my mother's painting, the one you admired in the corridor. I'd choose poverty with you over wealth without you, and I'd make that choice every single day for the rest of my life if it meant earning your trust." She studied his face, searching for the lie, for the crack in the facade. But there was no facade anymore, just a man stripped bare, offering himself without armor or protection. "That's not what I want," she said slowly. "I don't need you to give up your wealth, Gilbert. I need you to stop letting it define your worth, to understand that you're valuable because of who you are, not what you own. Can you do that?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I've spent so long believing the opposite, but I want to learn. Will you teach me?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. She could refuse, could protect herself by walking away from this man who'd hurt her so deeply. It would be the safe choice, the smart choice. But when had love ever been about safety? "I have conditions," she said. He nodded. "Name them." "First, you dismiss the guard who struck me, not just from your service, but you ensure he finds employment elsewhere. I won't have violence in my name." "Done. Consider him gone. What else?" "Second, you establish a fund for people like my father. People who fall on hard times through no fault of their own and need a chance to rebuild. You use your wealth to help rather than to acquire." Something lit in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "How much?" "That's for you to decide. But it should be significant, meaningful, not pocket change." "Agreed. And third?" She took a breath, steadying herself. "Third, you take me back to the dungeon." He jerked back as if she'd slapped him. "What? No, Irene, I'm not as a prisoner." She reached out, catching his hand before he could retreat. "Take me back there and tell me the truth. All of it. Why you're so afraid of vulnerability. What happened to make you believe love was weakness? I need to understand, Gilbert. If we're going to have any chance, I need to know the man behind the walls." His hand trembled in hers. For a long moment she thought he'd refuse, that she'd pushed too far, demanded too much. Then he nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "If that's what you need, then yes. I'll tell you everything." They walked through silent corridors, down stone staircases, into the depths of the castle where torchlight flickered against damp walls. The dungeon looked different now, smaller somehow, less ominous. Or maybe she was different, stronger, certain of her power in ways she hadn't been before. He lit the candle in the same bracket he'd used that first night. The flame cast shadows that made his face a landscape of light and dark. "My mother died when I was 12, he began, his voice echoing slightly off the stones. She was kind, gentle. She believed the best in people even when they proved her wrong. My father had died years earlier, left us with nothing but debts and empty promises. We lived in a single room, barely scraping by. She worked herself to exhaustion trying to keep us fed. Irene listened, seeing the boy he'd been beneath the man he'd become. When she got sick, I went to the neighbors asking for help, he continued. Begged them for medicine, for food, for anything. Every door slammed in my face. They said we weren't their problem, that poverty was a choice, that if we'd worked harder, we wouldn't be in such straits. I watched my mother die slowly while people who had more than enough refused to help us because we couldn't pay. His voice cracked. He pressed his palm against the dungeon wall, steadying himself. After she died, I swore I'd never be helpless again. I'd never be the one begging at doors. I threw myself into learning business, into making money, into building wealth that would protect me from ever being in that position again. And somewhere along the way, I forgot what I was protecting. I forgot that the point wasn't the money, it was the security, the ability to help rather than need help. I became the very people who'd turned me away. The confession settled over them like ash. Irene stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth of him, the vulnerability radiating from every line of his body. I understand now, she said softly. Why you built those walls. Why you trusted money more than people. But Gilbert, your mother didn't die because people lacked money to help her. She died because they lacked compassion. They had the means, but not the heart. Don't you see? You've been trying to solve the wrong problem. He looked at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. What's the right problem? Learning to be the kind of person who would have helped your mother, she said. Learning to value compassion over capital. That's what would honor her memory. Not building a fortress, but building a heart large enough to hold the pain of others. A sound escaped him, half sob, half laugh. He pulled her into his arms suddenly, desperately, and she let him. Let him hold her while his shoulders shook, while years of grief and fear and carefully controlled emotion finally broke free. And she held him back, this broken man who'd hurt her so badly, because she understood now. Understood the terrified boy underneath the wealthy exterior. Understood that healing him meant teaching him how to be vulnerable. I'm sorry, he whispered into her hair. For everything. For the dungeon. For the chains. For choosing wrong when you offered me everything right. I'm so sorry, Irene. I know, she said. I know you are. Dawn broke over the cliffs with the kind of beauty that made promises feel possible. Irene stood in the gardens wrapped in Gilbert's coat, the same coat he'd given her in the dungeon, which she'd somehow kept despite everything, and watched the sun paint the sky in shades of hope. He found her there as she'd known he would. Some things had become predictable between them, not in a boring way, but in the way of two people learning each other's rhythms, finding comfort in familiar patterns. I've been thinking about your second condition, he said, standing beside her. The fund for people who fall on hard times. I want to name it after my mother. The Eleanor Fund for Emergency Relief. Eleanor. She'd never known his mother's name. The fact that he trusted her with it now felt significant. She'd be proud of you, Irene said. I'm not sure about that, but maybe someday I'll deserve to think so. He cleared his throat. I also drew up papers releasing any claim on your family's estate. It's yours again, free and clear. And I've established an account in your name with enough funds to restore it, pay any remaining debts, and leave you comfortable for the rest of your life. She turned to face him. Gilbert, before you argue, let me finish. He pulled a document from his coat. This isn't charity. It's restitution. It's me trying to undo the harm I caused when I chose wrong. You don't have to accept it, but I need you to know it exists, that you have options. That staying with me, if that's something you're even considering, would be a choice, not a necessity. The thoughtfulness of it stole her breath. He was giving her freedom, real freedom. Not just from the debt, but from any economic pressure to forgive him, to stay with him, to compromise her principles for survival. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "If I take the estate and the funds, I could walk away right now. Never see you again." "I know." He met her eyes. "And if that's what you choose, I'll accept it. But Irene, I'm hoping, God, I'm desperately hoping that you'll stay. Not because you need to, but because you want to. Because you can see that I'm trying to become someone worthy of you." She took the papers, scanned the carefully written terms. Everything was exactly as he'd said. No conditions, no strings, no claims on her future. Just clean, clear freedom. "You really have changed," she said softly. "I've started to change," he corrected. "I'm not perfect, Irene. I'm still going to make mistakes. I'm still going to struggle with letting people in, with trusting that love isn't going to destroy me. But I swear to you, I will spend every day trying to be better, trying to choose you over my fears, trying to build a life where compassion matters more than capital." She folded the papers carefully, tucked them into the coat pocket. Then she reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I'm staying," she said. "Not because of the estate or the funds or any of that. I'm staying because when I look at you now, I don't see the man who chained me in a dungeon. I see the man who fought for me, who bled for me, who stood in that dungeon and finally let me see his heart. And that man is worth taking a chance on." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a storm, bright, beautiful, almost blinding in its joy. "I love you," he said. "I should have said it that night in the great hall. I should have said it every day since. But I'm saying it now, and I'll keep saying it until you believe it. I love you, Irene Marlowe. You're the fortune I almost lost, the treasure I was too blind to value. And if you'll have me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that choosing you was the best investment I ever made." She laughed, pulling him close. "That's terrible financial language for a declaration of love." "I'm working on it," he said, grinning. "Give me time. Maybe you can teach me proper romantic vocabulary during those interest rate discussions you're so fond of." "Maybe I will." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of possibility. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "But Gilbert, if you ever put me in chains again, I'm stealing more than 200 pounds next time." "Noted." He wrapped his arms around her, holding her like she was precious, irreplaceable. "How about instead of chains, I offer you a partnership, joint control of the finances, equal say in how we use the wealth, shared decisions about everything that matters? Now that's the kind of proposal I can work with." They stood together in the gardens as the sun climbed higher, warming the earth, burning away the last shadows of fear and regret. Below them, the sea crashed against the cliffs with eternal persistence. Above them, birds called out their morning songs. And between them, something new was growing. Not perfect, not without scars, but real and true and worth every risk. Later, she would insist on visiting the Eleanor Fund's first recipients together. He would discover he enjoyed helping people far more than he'd ever enjoyed acquiring property. They would argue about expenditures and priorities and the proper way to balance wealth with generosity, and somewhere in those arguments they would fall deeper in love. But for now, in this moment, it was enough to stand together, to have chosen each other despite the cost, to understand that the greatest fortune wasn't counted in gold or land or any material measure. It was counted in moments like this, in second chances and forgiveness. In the courage to risk vulnerability, in love that survived dungeons and debts and the darkest parts of human nature to emerge stronger on the other side. Gilbert had chosen his fortune over her heart once, but he would spend the rest of his life choosing differently. And that, Irene thought as she leaned into his embrace, was worth more than all the gold in his vaults. That was everything. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as beautiful and intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. See you on the next one.